Going live. Cloud Foundry After Dark.
I love
Here
that
we
big
are.
yellow button that Google gives you. You know, the feeling that, hey, things are actually happening.
Things
Hey,
are happening.
Cornelia.
We got Cornelia. It's
Hello.
happening. People are coming out of the.
Michael.
All right, Mike Payne. So
Nice.
we have a bunch of topics we could talk about. This week is going to be insane. Really the next 2 weeks between Cloud Foundry press releases from different people and some other stuff that's not actually public yet, but will be public soon.
Super excited.
Yes.
Keep us in suspense.
Yes. So I'm going to start with a bit of a monologue, and then we could go from there. So in the past, I have come out against the word PaaS, and I will basically ridicule if you use that word. I think it's a terrible word. I hate the way it sounds. It was like made up to fit into this convenient taxonomy of nonsense. It's not a real category. But I finally come to terms with how I can talk about PaaS and feel good about myself. And so I want to share that with everyone, share that with the world, starting with you.
Awesome.
So to me, PaaS, as a definition that I can accept, is this interface that a developer can interact with to deploy code. I think that's a consistent definition that will work across anything that people apply it to. So that will apply to the Herokus, the app engines, the rest of this stuff, platform as a service. Now, in the context of something like Cloud Foundry, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That PaaS is a feature, right? How does Heroku deploy Heroku? How does Google deploy App Engine? Because that's what we're talking about. That's what we're building. And that's why I always struggled when people say PaaS, because it's this superficial thing that's offered as a service. How do you operate that thing? So I don't know if there's a better word, but I'm just going to call it platform. So that's platform.
The reason I like platform, and I think I have less hate than you in general, so I don't hate the term PaaS as much as you do, just like I don't hate OpenStack as much as you do. But the reason I like the term platform is because most PaaSes only deal with the stateless app problem. They don't deal with stateful data services, right? And so folks talk about like what we call CF runtime as being the thing that orchestrates containers and sets environment variables and does binding and routing and load balancing for those containers. But that's just the stateless app piece, which is actually the easier half of what we do in a platform, which includes stateful data services and everything we do with Bosch.
Well, if you look at these other examples, Heroku, Google Engine, they certainly have data services, right? There is data services. How do they deploy those? How does Heroku deploy Postgres? Because that's the magic, right? Like that's a harder problem, and that's what we're actually solving. Say again.
Especially making a general purpose. It's like if you want to go and say, hey, let's make Postgres as a service and make it awesome, and that's your only problem statement, you can figure out how to do that. But if you want to say, hey, let's build an orchestration tool that allows you to do arbitrary data services and let a community of other people build data services using that tool that will run in anyone's platform environment, that's way harder, which is what makes it interesting.
It is way harder, which is what we try to do every day.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, I think you're onto something there, because I think that one of the themes that I keep seeing over and over again is that especially when you look at some of these smaller startups, like I was at DevOps Days in Vancouver, and there was a guy from PagerDuty who was talking about the platform that they're building to support their application. And he was doing all sorts of cool stuff, and you're the one who introduced me to DevOps Days, so you know this. You've heard this story over and over again. You've seen all these cool people who are doing these cool platform things to support their end game, which is PagerDuty or whatever their application is. And I've also talked to interview candidates who come from some of those places, and where they get really excited is they can be building out a platform that is serving their business need. But when they get to the point where they're like, oh, you guys are building out a platform so that other people can fulfill their business needs, that's kind of a different as a service. It's a different, you're kind of qualifying the platform that as a service on a different element of that.
Well, it's not really as a service yet, right? Like it's as a service in potential in a Git repo that you can run as your own service.
Yeah.
Right, makes sense.
Yeah.
So, Schaefer, can I bring up a meaty topic that I see people struggling with all the time? And Cornelia and I have spent a lot of time in the last couple of weeks doing sort of, I don't want to call them DevOps assessments, but I'm going to call them DevOps assessments. People saying, hey, we buy the vision, we want to do Agile Dev, we want to use PaaS, we want to go fast, we want to like change the relationship between the business and the developers and the folks that operate stuff. But they're still stumbling down in places, and then they ask for help, and they're like, hey, are we using the right tools? And we're like, it's not about the tools. And they're like, are we using the right methods? It's not about the methods. And one of these places where I think there's a lot of confusion, and I usually blame you in these conversations, by the way. I was like, Andrew invented the term DevOps, or he was sort of part of the DevOps movement.
Yeah, it's
and
Patrick, Patrick Dubois is the first one who used the word.
Okay. So I could blame Patrick, but
I've been talking about something that I was calling Agile operation or Agile infrastructure with respect to being able to build these types of essentially platforms. I mean, every project that anyone ever started with Puppet or Chef, they aspire to build a platform. They aspire to be able to provide self-service, these kind of functional, as you want it, for my devs, for my business, to be able to deploy, to be able to configure, to be able to do all the magic. That's always been the goal. So we built these kinds of things over and over again, each one slightly different, each one slightly better, usually better. But that's been a recurring theme that you see the momentum of those tools in those communities, and they're definitely evolving. But has it got to like a plateau, or what's like the next level? And I've been talking about. I mean, this is actually something that was clear to me when I was at Puppet, is that the central construct, the primary primitive, the highest level primitive, has to be it has to be a service. It has to be at least above the server. The fact that you care that you have servers, like, kind of fixes your perspective in a way that's not positive. And so you have to be able to be, and there's ways to do that. I mean, I think there's ways that could be even better than what we're doing, but it's basically the same idea that you have state machines with the message bus, and you're going to be able to announce state, which is how Cloud Foundry works, right? You have the message bus and the agents, Bosch agents or whatever, that talk to different parts of it, and then the Elastic runtime, same sort of setup.
So here's the challenge people have, though, is they say, okay, we get it. At the application level, we're going to involve the app dev team in the operations of their app, because we're going to give them a platform where the operational functions of, day two, hey, I can look at logs, I can deploy new releases, I don't have to hand that off to operations. But organizations don't want to let go of this idea that operations is something separate from development. And they call it all sorts of different things. They call it support, they call it ops, they call it production. And the challenge there, and certainly regulated industries, they have this idea that developers should never be allowed to touch production, usually because the real data is there and the developers aren't allowed to see real data. And so they say, hey, how do we manage the relationship between the DevOps teams, or the developers, or the application operations, or whatever you want to call it, and this prod operations group, where, because of the perversity of the industry we're in, or how perverse our organization is, we can't dismantle that?
So there's a body of work, and there's principles, some of which are great, that a lot of people adopted, that is called ITIL. Right, that sort of dominates a lot of these discussions.
Yeah.
And the way that those audits work in most cases, actually I think all cases, is you're held accountable for doing what you'll say you'll do, right? And so what's happened is that people said they would do things a certain way a long time ago, and they never really revisited, and that got applied across industries.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go back to the root of those principles and the way most of those audits should work, in theory, you just have to do a better thing and then make sure that it's articulated and that you're held accountable to your own process, and you're going to be able to do fine on your audits, and even those highly regulated.
I mean, this is the same thing as in ISO 9000 or anything else. You know, the process really is just that you're doing what you documented you would do, and not any particular set of rules, in general. But I still like this idea that that dev and ops and support and QA, that these are their tasks and not necessarily roles. But I still think there's a gradient, that not all developers are going to be involved in operations, and not all operations people are going to be developers at their core. I mean, I think there are folks that, in the same, like, there's a sense.
So I agree. And to me, this is my way of thinking about this. Is there's been a lot of talk about, you got to break down the silos. You got like the ops people should do dev stuff, and the dev people should do ops stuff. And I don't actually subscribe to that, because if you have a big undifferentiated mass in an organism, that's a tumor, right? So to me,
so that's going to be tonight's quote. Developers doing operations is essentially cancer.
It can be. It can't. It's suboptimal, right? So what I believe in is systems thinking, and signaling, and communication. And if you think about your own, biological system, then you have organs, right? Organs have membranes. There's things that are signaling from your heart to your brain. There's things that are signaling from all these different parts to each other all the time. And if those are in balance and harmony, then you get to be like alive, and the more optimized things are, then the healthier you are. And by definition, the less healthy, the more dis-ease, right? So if it's not easy, then that's dis-ease.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that when you look at the silos that people have, and it's not easy, then that's a disease. But the opposite of that, just like getting rid of all silos, can also be just as pathological.
So, I'll interject, because I totally agree that DevOps, to me, the definition of DevOps is not developers doing operations and operations doing development, because honestly, I can't, and by the way, no enterprise that I talk to is comfortable with the idea of allowing all of their developers to start doing operations. And as an app developer for 25 years, I'm not comfortable going in and doing operations myself. But
the fact is the stack is too wide and too deep.
Exactly. There are different skill sets. That's right.
You really know it.
There are different skill sets. But I think that the notion of DevOps, for me, it's an undefined term, really. But the way that I define it is that DevOps is about eliminating the barriers between developers and operations, development and operations. And some of those barriers are cultural barriers, and there's all sorts of stuff that you can do around that. And technology isn't the only thing that can solve that and eliminate or reduce those barriers. So culture is part of it, process is part of it, but then technology can help. So, for example, if you have the same runtime platform that you use in dev and QA and operations, then that eliminates one of the barriers that we see all the time right now, which is, hey, it runs on my machine, I don't know what your problem is. Mm-hmm. And it's because the machines are totally different. The way that they configure code is different. If they, for example, have to rebuild code once it's actually getting deployed out into production, because I have to build in a different property file because I need different properties, and that is part of my war file, then that's a barrier. And we can start to break down those barriers, and that's where I think a platform can help. A carefully thought out platform that is really focused on eliminating those barriers and allowing things to move through that cycle without so much resistance, I think that's where a platform, that's where the technology can help.
So this is going back to the point Josh started making, which is the technology, the tool, the platform isn't enough. It has to coincide with adoption of the processes that understand, leverage that platform, and that's the same for all these tools.
Here's something I'm trying to. I don't want to borrow and massacre the term SRE, and I've been doing this recently, and I think it's egregious, and I should stop saying, hey, I want to describe everything like it's site reliability engineering, which it's not. But I think that the crux of the thing I'm trying to get at is what makes a great IaaS layer, right? Or what makes good layers in technology is a really clean abstraction that has a strong contract. And one of the things we invented with Agile, we being you and other people, not me, I'm a young kid, but was this idea that a user story was a contract and an abstraction between business and technology, and saying, I want this to happen, not how to make this happen, right? And I feel like this gets lost. When people teach Agile, they focus on, here are the tools to manage stories and backlogs, not 90% of it should be, here's how to write a great story. Here's how to decompose what you actually want to have happen to a thing that developers, you're trusting them to implement it, and you're trusting them to deliver you something that could be measured against what you're actually trying to accomplish.
So I would like
SRE implies the same thing between the developers and the operations, whether they're one team or two teams. It says, here's what we need from infrastructure in terms of reliability, and here's the agreement, the limitations you can hold us to deliver that experience.
All right, I'm going to make a few points. So starting with the thing that you said about the stories, and I think this will fix 90% of the problems that people have with stories. This is the way I was taught to think about stories. Is a story is a promise to have a conversation. It's not an attempt to codify the thing into this paper or website. It's a promise to have a conversation and putting a conversation when it has to happen. So there's whatever business in that. The hardest thing in software, in my opinion, after doing this for however long now, is maintaining the fidelity of the business ideas as they go through that engineering machinery and come out the other side. And so by having those conversations, then you get a higher fidelity, right? If you just write those things and then whisper down the lane style, let them go through the pipeline, and then they come out the other side and they're like, hey, what's this? Which is another reason why the iterations and the tight feedback loops on those stories is so important. And then to bring it into what you said with the SREs, I think if you just start with this idea that the SREs and the developers promise to have a conversation, or the operators promise to have a conversation, that'll fix a lot of your problems. And then I will also add, and this is stealing from Todd Underwood's talk from Google DevOps Days Pittsburgh. So he's the director of SREs at Google Pittsburgh, and he gave a talk last year at DevOps Days Pittsburgh, which is online, and it's an awesome talk. And one of the things he says about SREs and what people would get the most benefit out of is he basically says that SREs are not ops. He doesn't like to reify the idea of operations, although there's obviously these skill sets and these understandings about the systems. He says SREs are engineers who fix operational problems with software, and he said most organizations would get 90% of the benefit of SREs that Google has if they just took a third of their developers, and instead of putting them on feature work, they just cut them off, put them under a different management structure, and said your job is to make this thing better. Like, you're not worried about the features, you're not worried about the projects, you're not worried about the dates. Just go make everything that everyone else is doing work better, and with software.
Yeah. So this idea that a story is a promise to have a conversation, I think I've been talking a lot. People keep asking me about OpenStack Trove, right? Which is a funny thing to segue, but I will connect this back. They say, look, we feel like you can run Oracle as a bare metal database, or you can run Oracle, using OpenStack Trove in some weird way, or you could run Oracle inside, the Cloud Foundry platform, using Bosch and connecting it through to your applications using service brokers. What should we do? What's the right thing to do? And I said, all three of those are the right thing to do when they map to the right part of your organization. Because if it's an institutional database, your entire institution owns connections and applications that depend on it, and therefore an upgrade to that database is an institutional event. If it's a multi-BU asset, multi-BU data service, you probably want to run that inside OpenStack, because OpenStack is usually run as a multi-BU piece of infrastructure, and changes and upgrades and downtime and et cetera to that database need to be organized and visible. You need to have those conversations and promise to have those conversations at that level. But the data services inside CF, where I see them really popular today, is the organization that owns an org space, an org or collection of spaces inside CF can own data services that map directly to that construct. And this doesn't mean you don't use Bosch to manage data sources and data services that are running inside OpenStack that don't connect through platform. But just if platform is the only way that you talk to that data service, then it makes sense to keep it inside CF. And this is kind of like that notion of the promise to have a conversation needs to map to exactly the tools and interfaces that you're using, because there's no way to rely on the tools to prompt you to have a conversation with people who don't use those tools. Is that crazy? Am I crazy?
Well, yeah, but that statement is right.
So I can't tell you how much I love that quote of a story is a promise to have a conversation. But the one thing that I'll add to it, another little asterisk, is the way this story is written is quite key, because the way the story is written is going to have a direct impact on the conversation that happens.
Sure.
So that is I'm guilty of years ago. I was kind of introduced to quote-unquote Agile. This was well before my Pivotal Labs days. And I wrote stories as, I'm a software developer. I wrote stories as I already had the architecture in my head. And I said, now implement this part, and now implement that part. So my stories were, go and implement the interface for the database. My stories were not from a user perspective at all. And so that didn't stimulate the right conversations, and it was ultimately not successful. So
software is hard.
Yeah.
So Waters, you made it.
Hey, what's up?
What do you think of this Cloud Foundry thing?
Never heard of it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Let me tell you about it. I'm gonna get Cloud Foundry into your heart.
What does it do?
Well, it streamlines development and operations across your infrastructure.
Why would people want to do that?
Because they're sick of going slow and being down all the time.
Did we talk about the Patrick Dubois tweet yet?
The thread? No, we did not. Do you want to bring that in?
Yeah, it's. I thought it was one of the most exciting things of the week for some of the conversations I had the previous week really were I think about that principle. And let me get the tweet out here.
So we did mention Patrick Dubois as the person who coined the term DevOps, as the organizer of the first DevOps days back in 2009.
Yeah. So we mentioned that early on in this conversation?
We did. So the tweet, you want to read it for the listeners at home?
Yeah. Patrick said on the 24th yesterday, he said, in 5 years, config management as we know it will be like C coding, only required in some specific optimization cases. Agree? And so, it's really fascinating to me as a person who's very passionate about helping enterprises with structure as opposed to just ad hoc automation and configuration management, to have the guy that really first organized the DevOps movement coming around to saying that, look, configure management is a much lower order thing that is not necessarily representative of the full value you're trying to get from a delivery platform and an operations platform. So I thought that was pretty cool, because it was only like 2 years ago where really it was the kind of the chef folks that were leading the whole DevOps conversation and rallying that, and you at Puppet to make that a word. And now people have realized that yes, it's something that's happening, but it's perhaps a different kind of trend than it originally started out as. And I also like further on those threads, there are a lot of people talking about the evolution of declarative as the backbone of the kinds of platforms that Patrick really wants to see evolving. So I thought that was great, third-party signal in terms of our strategy and what we've been up to.
So then there's also another tweet that I think it's interesting to add to that from Kelsey Hightower.
Yeah.
He's been involved in a bunch of this stuff. He was at Puppet for a while, I think, and he's now at CoreOS. And he said on January 23rd, at what point is the infrastructure you're trying to build just another PaaS with your preferred limitations?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is that you're either trying to build a platform, or you're just completely content with paying debt constantly, paying technical debt in terms of operations constantly. And those are the only two gates. Like, you can't go outside of it. I spent last week with a group at one of the top 4 rental car companies in the world, and they had done some great technical things, and they had built a little bit of a deployment platform on Amazon, just raw. And all the things that they ran into were day 2 operations burdens and concerns. And we had such an awesome conversation. They're like, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And it was so important because that first deploy is sort of, there's a lot of ways of doing that. But then how are you going to update the OS when you have a bug? Like, how are you going to do that for every different user that's configured in every different way? And then if you let your users just use raw Amazon, and they start logging into ELBs and changing ELB configurations in 1,000 different ways, how do you even start to think about that in a structured way when you go to update it or manage that? You've got to almost go down into the config level of each ELB when you want to change an app. So it was such a really inspiring conversation for me because they'd gotten to all that day 2 operations pain. And so the more we talked about where our R&D was focused, the more their eyes just kind of lit up. And I felt like I'd really done something useful for folks by working on this.
There's a bunch of people that have been talking about like Heartbleed and Poodle as being like great case examples of day 2 operations requirements. We've got to update the OS. We've got to update Java 6. Did you guys see the latest batch of WikiLeaks docs, Snowden docs? Did you have a chance to read through any of that?
No.
You got to go read through it, if only for the fact that
I have a job, Josh.
I'm surprised Michael has not, actually.
Only for the fact
here, I would expect that he would have gone down that rabbit hole.
Gopher Rage is being written using Agile test-driven development. And I just thought, first off, the fact that you have an exploit being developed by the government named Gopher Rage is amazing. But second, that they acknowledge that Agile is really the only way to write any kind of software, including software that's intended to exploit firmware of sort of anybody, arbitrary. But the thing I liked about the fact that this is now very public is I've been out there ranting now since October about the fact that a bring your own container model, and whether you're using Rocket or Docker or Warden or Garden or I don't care, whatever container model you're using, if you are not using a platform to compose your container images, if you let developers bring their own containers, it's like letting people arbitrarily stick USB sticks into your laptop and run things with root permissions. Like, you're having unprotected sex with the internet. It's not a good idea. And I thought Gopher Rage was such a very timely feedback to say, look, guys, bus mastering exploits of anything on the PCI bus without root permissions is fairly trivial, and all sorts of countries do it all the time. Please don't do that to your infrastructure. Nobody is going to take that one, right? Okay.
Well, you did just say unprotected sex with the internet, so that's sort of...
I think, though, you've got to, if you're going to articulate that point, you've got to articulate where the narrative comes from in terms of using containers for, like, in a raw way. And it comes from small teams of 5 or 8 people, which have been custom hired, where people understand the whole stack. They have no process overhead. They are responsible for everything. And so I like to say if you've got a team of 5 that does the whole life cycle of the app, or 8 that does everything, it might make sense to combine the sysadmin role and the developer role if that's the way your team is structured. Now, unfortunately, in most of IT that gets done, it couldn't be further from that, where you have one tiny team that owns everything, process to governance, sysadmin, OS, everything.
So I think here it's worth noting the difference between the infrastructure operations and the application operations, and possibly even another category of the platform operations. And if you see what's evolved at places like Amazon, who they might know something about cloud computing or whatever, they adopted a process where they certainly have sysadmins that run an infrastructure, but if you're a developer, you are a first-line call for the application that you wrote, right? Like you have operational responsibilities, and you see that repeated again at Netflix. There's a similar setup at Google. Google has SREs that maintain this fabric, this infrastructure platform, but then as a developer, you're on call until you prove your stuff works, and then they'll transition it, and the SREs will take care of it after that. So I think you have to be clear when you talk about operations, and this is just, we're like in a brave new world, right? Like we're inventing this as we go, but there's operational responsibilities that are different from an application, and the thing that happens in a lot of these old style organizations is you have operators who have zero context for the app. Sometimes they have zero context for the business, but there's like this thing that's alerting. They don't know why. They have no way to fix it. They basically have to wake up a developer anyway before they're going to make headway on some of it. They just know that their whatever process is having problems, and having that person who had all that context and wrote that thing in the first place is what you're going to need anyway. So why not just have that person fix it? But it also does another thing, is it moves the responsibility for feeling the pain to the person who will create the pain. Because the other thing that happens in a lot of orgs is developers are like, oh, Friday night, 4 o'clock, let's push it into production. It's going to be a great party. And then they go to their buddies' like bachelor party or whatever, and then like their thing blows up, and then no one can find them for 2 days.
So Josh, I think we have to responsibly here air our dirty laundry too around Spring Boot and the debate you and I had around that, because let's not act like we don't have some details to work out in terms of how we're conceiving this. So as Josh and I know from a weekend hacking on it, when you use Spring Boot, right in your invocation as you start your app, it says, and this is how I expect to see Tomcat exactly configured. And actually, when you push a Spring Boot app to Cloud Foundry as the author, right now the final word comes from the Spring Boot application.
So
now,
this is what happens essentially is what version of Tomcat you're running. The operator team will assume that it's what was in the build pack. In other words, we said that this is the build pack we want, but Spring Boot can take over that and say, no, actually, we're going to give you a totally different version of Tomcat because that's what the app is asking for at runtime.
And that was done. Now, Spring Boot was done for developer simplicity, right? It's an incredible tool. It's what Netflix uses for 50% of their apps because it's right in the code. All of the runtime context is just automatically managed by Spring Boot.
It's almost like a container,
Yeah, but here's the problem. And this is why I say it's a promise to have a conversation. That I love that line because it's become now that in production, the only way to debug a Spring Boot app reliably is to use Actuator, to use a bunch of the sort of Spring Cloud monitoring endpoints. Because your traditional view of saying, oh, I'll go look at my sort of JVM configuration and how it was set up and what build pack they're using, it's going to lie to you. That the Spring has taken it so far to the like infrastructure as code that actually all configuration is really in the hands of the app developer at the moment of deployment and even at runtime. And the old way of saying how do I inspect, what's my introspection mechanism has changed as well.
Yeah, so I think
it's powerful, but we have to start thinking about these lessons.
As I think we're going to have to add some functionality to detect that and to give operators view into that and potentially have some hooks into Spring Boot to say, oh, actually, you need to now update thyself. So I think we'll solve it, but I just wanted to make sure it doesn't sound like we're picking on, like that we're perfect in some ways, because I think we have to keep a constant eye on what is code and what is configuration. Where does that actually begin and end? Because I don't always have a good answer for those two things.
Yeah. I mean, I think we are perfect. But
I mean, some lessons you have to learn by doing it wrong.
No, literally, this one came up because Josh and I were sitting at this very table in my house, and we were just using it, and we're like, "Hey, is the build pack winning or is Spring Boot winning?" And we're like, "Actually, Spring Boot is totally winning."
And we had Josh Long there, and we're like, "How do we figure out what version of what are we running?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, there's the old way which doesn't work, and you can look at those logs, but they're not right, and then there's the new way."
So I do think this is an evolving story because Spring Boot is incredibly popular because it gives that developer that lower configuration container to manage to use. So
Yeah, but that developer probably didn't have something like Cloud Foundry to start. And so they were getting that simplicity from Spring Boot as opposed to getting it from the platform. And so I think that's the thought-provoking thing is who owns that decision now and how do we deliver that simplicity to the developer?
well, that's the awe-inspiring thing about our new cloud platform group is the Spring group and the Cloud Foundry group are all in one bucket.
Yep, exactly. But they weren't before, so that's what you're pointing out is.
Yeah, and I really want to cross-pollinate where people work and what teams they're on and blur a little bit of the line.
Yep.
So that we think about that, very cohesively.
Yep.
So what else happened this week, or what's looking forward?
I think we should give some late after dark because, as we know, like 8 people have ever watched this total. We should give the after dark crowd some inside baseball. That's the new thing I want to do. Like, this is where the news happens before it happens. Like,
Okay.
if you're crazy enough to stay up on a Sunday. First, I got to tell you that I told our whole executive staff at an exec staff dinner this week about After Dark, and they're like, "Really?" And so Paul turns to me. I said to Paul, "I was like, Paul, you're gonna come on After Dark, and like, here's what we do. It's 8 o'clock. We get on and we hang out." And he's like, "I'm not signing up for that, James." So I do think for the crazy people, like the 10 or 20 people that watch this every week as it's live, we should give them some inside baseball and news before it's news. What do you guys think about that?
Totally. I love breaking rules anyway.
Okay, so how about this one? Microsoft has people writing Cloud Foundry code right now. How's that for news?
So
Is
there'll
that,
be
is that a
what they're working on?
is that a company that matters?
In
Never
cloud,
heard of them.
probably.
Michael's saying no. He's like, that'll never work in the enterprise, James. Let me tell you about how enterprises think. They don't trust Microsoft.
Their cloud guys still believe in InfiniBand for private cloud. So
Yeah, fair enough.
Here's the narrative. I understand it. We had a really good year this year on CF and Pivotal CF in particular. And so the Azure team at Microsoft, very smart, market-focused people, said, hey, GE, Philips, all these top people are calling us and saying, we want to use Cloud Foundry and we don't support it on Azure today. So it's good. We got some good buddies there. Patrick Chenazon used to be on the CF team, and he connected us. And it's no big secret, but we will make some PR about it. But Microsoft will be committing folks, is committing code right now, working on code right now for Cloud Foundry and Azure integration, and I think it'll expand from there. And I think it's more of just a win for enterprise customers that Microsoft is committing these resources to open source code to make the platform work better with Microsoft technologies. And they did that. They called us. So it was, I think, a good market signal, and that's pretty exciting.
On a related topic, at least until Microsoft joins the foundation, the first board meeting happened. So the first Cloud Foundry Foundation board meeting was this week, or last week.
And there's a rockstar executive director who will be announced when it's the right PR moment, I guess. But that's news I can't make because it's sort of much bigger than just us.
But if you were at the thing, you probably know.
Yeah.
They'll come out in the next 2 weeks.
His only comment to me was, this board's way technical. I was like, of course, it's got like Nick from Intel on it, and he's got Rob, me, my boss on it. He's like the guy that used to be the coder developer so good that Google couldn't figure out how he was so fast. Like, yeah, it's a technical board. It's a technical product, man. So we'll see how long that lasts.
It's exciting to see that. I mean, it's $1 trillion worth of logos from a market cap behind a project.
We've never seen that story before.
Well,
Josh,
Sorry.
you do it right this time, my friend. Don't worry.
No, Schaefer and I just remember the first time I called Schaefer and I was super excited. I was like, Schaefer, I added it up. There's $1 trillion worth of logos on the OpenStack slide now. He was like, that's never going to go anywhere. So, actually,
at the same time, I'd spent like a year and a half of my life trying to deploy the thing. So
I was in Vancouver this week meeting with a bunch of customers, and I was over at the UBC campus with the Triumph guys. And they're running a giant OpenStack cloud. And actually, the quote in the meeting that freaked me out a bit was the guy says, well, you know, we're connecting to a cloud with this peer and a cloud with that peer. And I was like, when you say cloud, what do you mean? He's like, well, obviously OpenStack. I was like, oh, like in his worldview now, he's gone from no clouds, never, ever, to cloud equals OpenStack, which, you know, in that, for whatever reason, the scientific high-energy physics community, probably because of Tim Bell, has redefined like cloud means OpenStack, and everybody in high-energy physics does OpenStack now, and they do it at ridiculous scale. So anyway, I was trying to get them excited about Cloud Foundry, and they're like, you know, we still mostly just write stuff in Fortran, and it's mostly C. And like we spend 2 years on one algorithm, so like rapid development and deployment's not really our focus. It's all batch. And I was like, you're right. I've got nothing for you.
Your impact is usually much greater elsewhere.
Generally, that was just, it was like in between a lunch meeting and a breakfast meeting. I was like, let's go see the Triumph guys. We have to go tour the Linear Accelerator again. So I love those meetings.
Yeah.
Really, really cool guys. Really good members of the OpenStack community too.
How about one more inside baseball, Andrew? You were part of this one. A government in Asia is joining the Cloud Foundry Foundation and wants to standardize on Cloud Foundry. Isn't that neat?
I've heard of Asia.
that will be public soon.
Yeah. So I think that announcement will come out at the time of their choosing, but pretty cool that Andrew and I were in Asia over the first week of December, and we came back, amongst other things, with an entire government of a major republic there that would like to standardize on Cloud Foundry and build center of excellences around Cloud Foundry throughout the country, which is pretty cool. Josh was also there to visit them. So
earlier.
It was an interesting conversation because they were comparing their options. It wasn't like they had already chosen Cloud Foundry when we got there. And we spent a good hour with them comparing some of the other open source platform options.
Yep. So those are two good inside baseball nuggets that you heard here first. The third, maybe best inside baseball nugget of this week, which I hope will be a small shot heard around the world, is that we're going to put out some evidence and some commentary that shows that we are the fastest growing open source product in history in terms of market adoption through sales.
Mm-hmm.
So there's never been a product even remotely close to Pivotal CF in its first year, let alone first 3 quarters really, that has grown as fast or as large as Pivotal CF. And I think that'll be a fun headline this week, and look forward to more evidence around that. That's good inside baseball, man. Those are 3 good inside baseball chunks, I think, man.
That should be out by the middle of the week.
I think so, yeah.
And then there's also some of our hires that will be getting a little press this week. We're not going to tell anyone until they come out.
Oh, I thought they came out already. No?
Well, it's not really been public.
Okay.
There's some people that know, but...
So Waters hasn't tweeted it yet?
What's that?
Waters hasn't tweeted it yet?
Hold.
He's going to tweet it right now. Watch. He's got.
Well, he did tweet a tease saying, you know, we just hired a bunch of people, and I can't say who it is, right?
Yes.
I did. I was pretty pumped, Michael. I was pretty pumped. I think
VMware just hired a huge number of Cisco CIEs. That was not CIEs, distinguished engineers. That was pretty interesting. Like 5.
Huh.
Boom.
In a week.
Probably trying to do something with that virtualized networking thing they're working on over there.
Yeah.
No, but that's a great point. I mean, because VMware's gotten some momentum with that product. And so then when you see the smart people coming too, it's a good foreshadowing of where the market's going.
So here's another thing that happened last week, which is related to our interest, maybe we're talking about, is the 0.2 version of the app container spec came out. The CoreOS Rocket, and then there's some other implementations now. There's
well, the BSD jails one came out. That was really cool.
Yeah.
That was a real implementation of it.
There's a there's the C++ one and the FreeBSD one. I don't know. I think it's interesting to see that evolve. I think that it makes the conversation around that technology a little bit more grounded and anchored than what we were seeing before.
There was some interesting stuff in the Hacker News thread. I think, James, you sent a link to that, but I saw it earlier this morning. But, man, I tell you, there's some interesting sort of how not to do PR stuff going on in that community.
Oh, again?
No, man.
Yeah.
You have to be really careful of when you declare victory and start telling the market what's right and what's wrong. And I almost hate to touch it because there's some mild competitiveness there, like not a lot, but there's some implied, so I don't want to touch it. But
what was the actual commentary? I try not to Hacker News if I can avoid it, but
I feel like I'm watching someone who started Netscape claim that they've owned the whole internet and they're the spec for the entire internet just because they got that first little rocket out, of Netscape, of the first browser. And you got to be really, really careful about, big important markets evolve and have multiple players and version 2 products that are very important. So I kind of feel that's what we're watching there. And the author of Warden was one of the guys I spoke with. One of the early authors of Warden was one of the guys I was skiing with this weekend. And he, straight up said App Container is a far superior spec on every technical front. He's really curious if the market will. He's a little jaded about how much hype there is in the market, but he said as an engineer, he says App Container is in every way superior to the original Docker spec, or Docker, which is not a spec. It's just a project.
Yeah, that was part of the problem, is they basically hacked together a spec afterwards in response to Rocket, and at that stage it's too late.
Yeah. So I certainly hope for us, like when Diego's out, order of operations, that I would love to support Rocket as a first-class citizen. We're trying to launch the first, the MVP that just has Docker support. But I think the technical superiority of the Rocket spec will be something we support very robustly over time after we get past that MVP.
Well, I think it's worth noting that the technology there, which is what the Cloud Foundry core is based on, Elastic Runtime, you have systemd that can now pull images, arbitrary images, in and run them as containers. It's not that much technology. It's a feature of the Linux kernel. People got excited about it. And then, frankly, I think containers are great, but all the things people think they like about containers are really even more true about some of the unikernel, OSV, OpenMirage type stuff. So it'll be interesting to see, where people get stuck and what ends up being a plateau or a local optimization around different parts of this technology. If it follows the same curve, since the Linux kernel had containers since 2007, people will get excited about OSV in another 3 or 4 years.
I'm glad that there's a robust technical conversation happening there now that talks about trade-offs versus just first person to a brand wins the technical conversation, which is pretty scary in my humble opinion.
That's a meritocracy, Waters.
That's a marketocracy, I think.
So what else is awesome? What got you excited for? I'm going to be going to MonkeyGraw, FOSDEM, and then Configuration Management Camp this next week. 6-day swing through London and then Belgium, and I'm going to give a talk about Bosch, which is sort of related to some of the stuff we started this episode with, managing services as a first order primitive.
Yeah, that's another one that people don't know we haven't announced yet, is that Bloomberg joined the Cloud Foundry Foundation. and we're waiting until the right time to announce that. We've just been a little bit quiet on it, and they're good friends with Josh and I, and huge advocates of Bosch. So I think if we wanted to be more marketing friendly, we'd probably get out there, wave the flag on Bloomberg. But that was a good technical win, and they joined the foundation. We just need to package that up at the right time. But they're big Bosch fans, so I know that Justin's going to be over there at FOSDEM too. So it'll be good to have you and Justin in one spot.
And Tamer. Yeah, Justin's bringing a couple of other folks too. We were really drilling in. I mean, all those questions about where do you run the data services and who owns them and how do you operate and manage and monitor them, that's the heart of those conversations. Saying, great, we're going to use Bosch.
Yeah.
But using Bosch does not imply who owns the operations of those services. And it's a pretty interesting, and especially, I think it was easier, frankly, with monolithic databases, just conceptually. People are like, oh, create a new database, or you create a new table, or you have a schema update, and it's an institutional event, and it shouldn't happen. And now we have there's no SQL, and it's a document store, and maybe there's a queue, and you're consuming things off the queue, and maybe there's shared libraries, and maybe not, and I don't know, the ops folks are struggling with this worldview. They love it from a dev standpoint. People do whatever you want, but from an ops standpoint, they're like, wait, when do we play the schema migration? And who owns that? And is that something that the dev script does as you redeploy, or is it something the ops people do separately? I mean,
what I loved about Justin from Bloomberg's story was, hey, we tried the chef as hard as we could, and if there's ever a man who was capable of chefing something into submission, it's Justin. But he said he wasn't getting real services from the community. Like, the community was not giving him data services in the same way where we spend 9 months with 10 engineers running a MySQL service and then optimizing everything about it, and then declaratively stamping it out in a repeatable way with Bosch.
Well, what we're really building is a package manager for distributed systems. Yeah. So just like you could do apt-get install, and you could have MySQL running on your little one-node system, we're doing that for a distributed system.
I think you're underselling us, bro. It's after dark, so I'm going to shout you out. You just undersold the mission. Because
that's my strategy.
You undersold the mission, my friend. The thing that we're doing is we're only giving you packages that we've run as a cloud service, which comes back to your passion, which is if you're not running it as a service before you, this is your beef with OpenStack, right? We don't just give you some packages. We give you some packages we've run as a service in production for a long time that you can run in almost exactly the same way. There's no other game in town that does that.
I think you're understating it now, because I know this is your particular passionate point, which is, hey, we've run it in prod, and therefore we know what the experience is really like. But there are lots of folks that also sold cloud software saying, hey, we run it in prod, and therefore you can buy it from us, where the software was nothing like what they were running in prod. The thing that is powerful about Bosch services is that they're packages for distributed systems. And this is, there was a new service that came out. LinkedIn did some new data, scalable distributed store thing, and I took a look at it. I tweeted about it earlier. I was I didn't mean to be dismissive, but I was like, yep, it's got a Paxos store in it, and it's got a message bus, and it separates the cluster state from the actual data. Therefore, the architecture is roughly correct. The pieces they chose seem kind of like last year's decisions instead of this year's decisions. But
well, that's probably when they made them.
Right. Exactly my point. And that's the thing is, when you look at this, it becomes so reductionist, but it's so easy. It's like, great, you have a package for distributed systems. Awesome. If you don't have a Paxos implementation in what you're using for that, that's not a distributed systems controller. It's just scripts. It's not going to work.
You could make Raft work.
Did we talk about Cornelia being on the operations team for this month at the beginning?
We did not.
Yeah. Raft, Paxos, same thing, roughly.
So I think it's worth mentioning that Cornelia is one of our trusted advisors and engineering advisors to our customers. And what is Michael flashing to us?
You're wearing a Docker shirt.
As he wears his Docker shirt.
So this is my daughter. This is my daughter saying it's time to go to bed. So I'm going to go and put her to bed.
That's awesome.
Cheers, mate.
Totally fair play.
I didn't say much, but it was fun hearing the conversation. I'm meant to be in New York this week, but it's probably looking unlikely with the blizzard. But
Stay safe out there.
I canceled it.
Yes. Big
So
snap.
I'm going to San Francisco tomorrow.
Rainbow.
There's a blizzard.
Rainbow pajamas. She's like, in bed.
I'm hoping the storm parts and I can just make a straight shot to London.
That is the second interruption on After Dark that we've had. Matt Stein's wife came in and said, "Eh." And now Michael's daughter is the second to say, "What in the world are you doing on a Sunday night talking about technology?"
So we were about to hear the Ops Safari that Cornelia's been on.
So yeah, it's week 1 of Ops Safari, and this is where we're going to air some internal dirty laundry. We already started that earlier in this hour, so I'll tell you that my first day was Tuesday morning, and the very first thing that I got to do was I got to see us handle an incident in prod. And so I'll tell you what the incident was. We were actually dropping some logs because we had a customer who was running on PDubs, on Pivotal Web Services, so on run.pivotal.io.
It's After Dark. You can air it. It was Sundance Film Festival, which after we successfully run it for the entire time, we're going to come out and talk about it. But Sundance launched on PDubs.
So we didn't have a problem with the request. We were dropping logs because we didn't have enough log aggregators.
Right. So yeah, let me tell you the story. So Sundance, the festival started this week. So the festival was on, I think it started on Thursday. And so Tuesday morning, they opened up a block of tickets. So a bunch of people hit the website, and they had anticipated that. So they had already kind of scaled up. They had already asked for more quota, and they had scaled up their application instances. And then this huge load came in, and they also had their log level turned up pretty high. And so they were generating just tons of logging information. So our log aggregators were dropping logs because there was just more traffic than they could handle. And so this was my intro into my pairing, my 1 month of pairing on CloudOps, and it was just the coolest thing because we went, I'll tell you how we did it. We got in the room, and first of all, it was one good example on doing pairing, not pair programming, but pair ops. So it's really cool. You get, we had 2 pairs, so my pair and another pair. We got into a room, and there's checklists and things like that that have to happen. So there's always, and there's, by the way, here's one really, really cool thing that you do. Part of our checklist, when we're going to change something, and what we did was we did what's called a manifest-only deploy. So we weren't actually changing any of the bits that were deployed in this distributed system. We were just changing the topology. So we were
job count for log aggregators, right?
Right, exactly. We were just adding a number of log aggregators. But even before we did that, so we said, okay, solution is we add more log aggregators. But one of the cool things that we did was we actually asked the system for a snapshot of what are you running right now. So we basically asked the system, please give us your deployment manifest. The deployment manifest is the declarative thing that describes what is currently running. So we asked the system what's currently running. Then we compared that to what we wanted to upgrade it to, just to make sure that we didn't drop the ball somewhere in the way. And that's really, really important because now I don't have to just trust my processes, trust that I captured every other change that I had done along the way. I can go back and ask the system. And that's really, really important. What's your state? So then we upped the number of log aggregators, and we said Bosch deploy, and the entire system stayed completely stable, and we added a number of log aggregators that added themselves into the cluster. They basically just added themselves to the cluster, and we watched the dropped messages drop by a ton. Now, I'll be honest with you, we were still getting some dropped messages, so you know what we did? We bumped up the log aggregators again. And now we saw the drop messages drop away even further. And what was so cool about it is we did all of this in the span of about an hour. And so we actually did a number of deployments of the platform. Of course, we didn't rev the entire platform, but we did a number of deployments. We were able to fix that up through the magic of Bosch. And by the way, we were watching the monitors and watching the metrics changing on the monitors the whole time we were doing it. So as a 25-year app developer, I thought it was freaking cool to watch this, to go through this operations thing and watch it. It's way, way cool. So I'm going to come on here and share stories with you for the next 4 weeks, if that's all right.
That would be awesome. Questions. One of them is, how did you, like, what math or what process did you decide how many log aggregators to add when you did the deploy?
So I'll be honest with you, it was we're flying by the seat of our pants, and I say that not to admit that we failed, but I actually say that to kind of demonstrate that the system, that Bosch allowed us to say, well, let's take our best guess, watch the results, monitor the results, and it wasn't a big deal that we didn't up it enough the first time around. We were able to up it, watch the results, and then very quickly up it again. So we didn't do a whole lot of analysis and math to try to figure out this monolithic thing of, oh my gosh, we better get this deployment right. We took our best guess, tried it, wasn't quite enough, and so we did it again. And it was hugely successful.
And then this is a comment as much as a question, but I'd be curious to see how our ops team and the cloud ops team would be interested in implementing a chat ops type of methodology for where you guys do work.
So what do you mean by chat ops?
So this has been something that's been discussed in the DevOps community for a few years now, and it was first really popularized by the way they do ops at GitHub. And the first really good talk of it was from this guy who used to do a bunch of stuff at Rails Machine, ended up at GitHub, and his talk was at the PuppetConf. And what basically, they don't do any work on production that doesn't go through the chat room.
Okay.
So the whole ops team is in a shared chat room all the time, and then their bots do all the work. So instead of having a command line that like no one else ever sees, all work on the system goes through a single chat, and it changes the dynamics of a bunch of things. Like there's no mystery to what happened if everything goes through that single chat room. It's also ambient information about processes and the technologies. And if you see something go by you don't understand, you just say, hey, what was that? And everyone tells you. Where a lot of times if you're kind of, even if you're in pairs, I mean, pairing I think fixes some of that, but it's not the same thing as everyone sees everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Great idea. Yeah, I mean, Tony, I've found in just the last week of working with him, Tony Hansman, our head of our ops team, our cloud ops team, he's pretty progressive, and I imagine he's already thinking about that, and if not, moving towards implementing it. So
well, just ask him what he thinks of chat ops and see if there's a conversation.
The only thing, Andrew, is that our whole ops team is like 4 people. So,
yeah.
Well, how big do you think the ops team at GitHub is?
No, right. I'm just saying, like, I think that's a great idea. But the other thing is we've reduced the number of people who have to work on the problem space pretty significantly. But I'm gonna give Schaefer some guff now, because Cornelia is gonna have more time operating Cloud Foundry than he has after this month's up, and me and McGinty. So I think it'll be pretty cool to have Cornelia with a whole month of operations flying hours.
Yeah, I wanted.
One of the things I would like to see implemented across our little experiment is a lot more swapping. I would like to see people from the field be able to come and help the stuff that I'm working on. I'd like to see more of the pivots that are doing product work do operations. Like if you just do that, it'll pay large dividends over the next few years.
The one thing I can tell you already is that the ops team that I worked with this week, when we did have conversations either at stand-up or during our IPM or our retro, in the retro, somebody said something about Firehose. I think it might have been me. I said something about Firehose, and one of the ops people said, "What's Firehose?" And Tony started to say, and he said, well, wait a minute, why don't you explain it? And so I got up on the board, and I'm saying, oh, here's what customers are doing, and I'm explaining, and I'm bringing that to the field, and here's what we're doing from the product. And that cross-pollination is just something that the ops team is just eating up. So I hope a benefit in both directions. So I agree with you. I think that having more cross-pollination, more through formal rotations, I think would be awesome. I'm loving it. It's a little bit tough because my day job is now my night job, but it's totally worth it.
Welcome to that, right?
Yeah, well, I know. The thing is, it's been that for a long time already. So now it's like
the club. Like your day job is just like how you talk to others, and then.
Yep. No, I'm delighted at the opportunity.
So we're just over an hour now. Unless anyone has another big point they want to make, maybe we just have a kind of parting word of wisdom, maybe on Haas. You know, what is something that stuck out in the last hour you want to reiterate or looking forward to this week?
I'm really excited about the Patrick Dubois tweet. I think the idea of the guy, and you know him, but the idea of the guy that originally did the first DevOps conference saying, hey, configuration management is not how people can add value, that's over. I think that's really exciting because 3 years ago, that was not the day-to-day message that everyone in the community was talking about. And so I think that the inevitable move towards distributed platform is on, and it's great to be a part of that community.
Anything, Josh?
No, I like James's summary. I think the DevOps is dead, long live DevOps.
Right.
Message is a pretty powerful one, which is that DevOps, we're not going to stop operating applications. I mean, Cornelia's lesson here is like even using Pivotal Web Services and even having built the right app and scaled it the right way, there are still operational experiences, right? The nice thing about that is it wasn't in the golden path, and it was fixed in an hour because the tools that we need are in place. So the DevOps experience doesn't go away. I think what's changed is what are those tools. The thing that scares me about this year, and sort of James, to your point of saying, look, we just had the biggest first year of an open source software product ever in history.
Biggest year ever.
The thing that scares me is we're going through the hype cycle so fast that people that want to use tools to try and solve human problems are going to get through to the part where they still have a human problem so quickly that I'm a little scared now that we're going to have all these people who are like, I adopted Agile and DevOps and I deployed a platform and I still have to go and talk to the developers to tell them what to build. I'm sorry, there's no part of platform that automates your requirement of understanding your own business out of the, we just come back to if you don't know what your business is and what you need to build to make your business better.
Gosh, that's the dirty truth, is that Agile puts huge stress on actual business definition of business value in a way in which Waterfall allowed them to shirk with sort of vague definition.
People blame
developers. You could shirk it for 18 months at a time, right?
That's what I mean. There is nowhere to hide now. You actually need real business technologists that understand where you want to drive this in terms of the software you're developing, like never before. And the feedback loop is vicious and fast if you're not up to caliber. So
I'm a little scared that we're going to have people start using Cloud Foundry because they heard it was cool, and not because they're actually ready for their business to be a software business.
That's inevitable, right? That's what that cycle means.
We shoulder a lot of responsibility to, and we won't be able to save all those cases, but we do shoulder a lot of responsibility to make sure that people understand that it's not just the platform and that we educate. We're not just responsible for delivering the technology. We have to educate them on what they need to do around that as well.
I'm going to deploy a Warren Buffett quote, which is that everything goes in the cycle, that you start with the innovators, you end up getting to imitators, and everything eventually goes to the idiots. So that's inevitable. That's the cycle. Innovators, imitators, idiots. And you can't stop that. There's no force that will stop that. That's how everything works. So we just have to do
that. Really cheered me up, Andrew. I'm really excited. That's like Kurt Cobain looking around one of his concerts and being, "Look at all these loser frat guys. I didn't write music for them. I'm checking out of town." This gave me my first Kurt Cobain moment working on this technology. Thanks, Shaper.
Well, go put on your flannel shirt and get a tattoo, and you'll feel fine.
Let's talk about the reverse experience, which is that new people learning to code for the first time that start on Pivotal Web Services are never going to hate operations. They're never going to hate other developers. They're never going to hate working in a team. They're probably not even going to hate source code control. Like we are saving our children from a decade of pain that we had to go through. That is pretty exciting.
Yep, I like that.
Let's go out on that note.
So I'm just going to take it full circle. Sorry, go ahead, James.
I was teasing you, Shaper. I said, don't let Shaper bring us down. We got a big high there. How do you want to go up?
I was going to try to bring it back up, which is kind of where we started, which I believe everyone wants a platform. They want a platform. Whatever they're trying to do with their scripts, with their tools, they want a platform. And if they're lucky, if they're thoughtful, then it's going to be a deliberate thing. And otherwise, it's just going to be this thing that you got to feed with human blood for eternity. And I really think that we, as our mission, our core mission right now, Cloud Foundry, to the point you're making, we're deploying a platform. We have thousands of apps running on that platform. There's 4 people that can fix production issues in an hour. And there's some other great stories. We'll try to get Tony to come join After Dark and tell us some of the stories.
And Tony hilariously has already been shouted out by Robin, who had a crush on him. I mean, talk about some After the Dark moments. That was pretty funny. Tony appeared for the first time because Robin from Elasticsearch admitted her first day at work, she totally had a crush on him back, 10 years ago.
And by the way, Andrew, feeding something with human blood, that's not actually kind of like an cheery moment for me, so good try.
Well, I was saying that's what people are doing. I know. All right, so how about rainbows? We get rainbows.
Unicorns.
Unicorns.
Yep.
I think that's probably a good time to get back to work, or go to bed if you're into such things.
I got to be up at 5 for a plane. So.
I'll see you in the office tomorrow, Cornelia. Look forward to hearing more of your operations notes.
You bet. We'll see you then.
The sun never sets on Cloud Foundry.
Indeed, no, it does not.